Here's the link. We're live.
And action.
All right.
So Kimberly, do you want to begin with introductions?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was just sending out the link to folks on Elixher. All right, everyone, welcome to the Difficult Love video chat. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kimberley McLeod. I am the founder of Elixher.com. It's an online magazine and resource for Black, lesbian, bi, and trans women. I am joining today and really happy to put on this chat with Sister Cinema. And we are here with Isis Azare, who is the founder of Sister Cinema. And we're also joined by Zanele Muholi, who is a phenomenal South African photographer, and she's joining us by audio. We also have some other great folks joining us today, and I'll have them introduce themselves after I tell you a little bit about why we're here today and about the film Difficult Love. So a little bit about Zanele. Zanele is, as I mentioned, a South African photographer. Her work represents the Black female body in a frank yet intimate way that challenges the history of the portrayal of Black women's bodies. And as I mentioned earlier, Isis is the founder of Sister Cinema, a monthly event showcasing queer women of color cinema. So the reason why we're collaborating today is because we really want folks to know about the great work that Sister Cinema does, and also their Indiegogo campaign. So they're raising $5,000 to launch a queer woman of color video on demand channel in collaboration with busfilms.com. So you can definitely visit Indiegogo.com/Sister Cinema online to make a donation towards that campaign. So we're here today to discuss this amazing documentary called Difficult Love. Difficult Love is a documentary about the challenges facing Black lesbians in South Africa. And people, you can tweet your questions to at Elixher Magazine or at Sister Cinema with the hashtag Difficult Love Film. Again, that's hashtag Difficult Love Film. So just to start off, I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves. So we can start with Andrea.
Hi, I'm Andrea Wing, and I am the founder of buskfilms.com. And Busk is a video-on-demand site for indie queer film. And we work with filmmakers from around the world to make their content available for rent online. And then we share the revenue of the rentals with the filmmakers. And I met Isis a few months ago, and she approached me about building a queer woman of color channel on the site, and I think it's a great idea. So that's how I have entered the conversation.
Cool. And should we go next? Okay. And I'm Daniela. I'm actually an intern at Autostraddle, which is a website for and by queer women. And we actually have featured Zanele's work before, and I'm a huge fan. So I found your guys' initiative through Facebook, and that's how I ended up here, because I want to talk about it more.
Okay. And I'm Deidre McPherson. I started Sister Cinema Cleveland back in June of this year after being very much inspired by what Isis is doing out in Seattle. We showed Difficult Love just a few months ago, and we had a fantastic showing, fantastic discussion about the film, and it was just a really moving, the documentary is so fantastic. We were really happy with it, and I'm definitely wanting to participate in this discussion with all of you, so thanks for having me.
So just to jump right in, Zanele, can you start off telling us a little bit about how the documentary Difficult Love came to be and what brought it along?
Hi everybody, Zanele Muholi here, visual activist in South Africa. The documentary was commissioned by SABC, which is South African Broadcasting Corporation, after Peter Goldsmith, who is not queer at all, he's just a straight white guy, requested to do a documentary on the work that I do and also a bit about my life, working with different individuals in different spaces, and also how I've managed to ensure that we have a visual history or histories here. So that's how it came about. Somebody came to me, wanted to do a documentary on me. I had to seek advice from other people who knew how these things were done. And I had some questions of why this person wanted to do a documentary on me. So somebody advised me that we become co-directors so that at least I'll have ownership to my own story. So that's it. That's how we became co-directors of the documentary Difficult Love. But it was financed by South African Broadcasting. We pitched and we got the pitch and the documentary was produced.
Okay, great. I know at the beginning of the documentary, it starts off with the South African Minister of Arts and Culture. She says a comment about one of your shows in LA that it's not art and that it was immoral and against nation building. So I wanted to start the conversation off with people just kind of sharing what you think defines art. What is your definition of art? And what should art represent? What should art do?
Is that a question for me or for everybody?
For everyone.
Yeah, but we might want to let Zanele start off. What do you think?
Sure.
So who gets started? Must I respond to that?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to say my work is beyond art. My work is about activism. So I use art to push it. And it's just happened that photography falls also under faculty of art. So it's basically a way of articulating my issues and my frustrations. If one doesn't see himself or herself as a Black queer person or as a Black a person who identifies differently, whose gender expression is different, and you don't see yourself in the media, obviously you try to find different formats or different platforms to claim every space that is there that is meant to be open for public. So whatever that I'm doing is way beyond art. And then it just happened that the art format or art media is used to speak about or to speak on certain issues that are taking place in my community and beyond my own community here in South Africa.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on what defines art for them?
I mean, for me, art it has such a broad definition. I mean, it comes in so many formats. You know, within the performing arts, the visual arts, there's so many genres that fall within that. And I mean, it's just an interpretation of what someone wants to express, and it's a big part of our society, and it's, you know, historical importance. It's something that's lasting, hopefully.
So one thing I caught that Zanele said is the importance of visibility and the importance of telling our own stories and using art, using our activism, using the media as a tool to tell our stories. And we all have experience, whether it's through writing on Autostraddle or through Sister Cinema or Busk Films or Elixher.com or artwork like Zanele's, and telling the stories of our community. Why is it important that we are the ones that tell our own stories in an authentic way?
I mean, I think it's especially important, especially the work that Zanele is doing. It's creating visibility that isn't there in a lot of cultures, and that it's really important because, I mean, without it, it's not going to help us progress towards more tolerance and acceptance and openness, and that, you know, that was one of the reasons why her film and her photography, it's so moving and important. So it's, yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think it also is important because we have control over the narrative that is being told, and we are able to tell our own story instead of having someone else tell it for us and tell what they see our story to be. And instead we can speak about our lived experiences and how they affect who we are, how we love, and how we exist. So yeah, I definitely second you on that with that.
I mean, the stories that we are telling within the community are a lot more progressive than the stories that are being told externally, especially well, I guess in more mainstream type of films. I think the issues that come from the films from within our community are much more pointed and progressive, and I think that's super important to be able to share, and especially important to be able to find the audience for those films.
Definitely. And just to add on Andrea's point, I feel as if one thing I really appreciated about the documentary Difficult Love, I felt like there were a lot of nuances and layers that typically aren't reflected in mainstream media. I know, for instance, you had these men who, I think too often in the media, African society or different parts of Africa or the Black community are depicted as monolithically homophobic. But then in the film, you saw that there were these men who were condemning the corrective rape. You saw that there were stories of family acceptance. You saw that, you know, whether it was the men on the sidelines cheering on these lesbian soccer players, there was a diversity. There were people who clearly were homophobic and anti-gay, but there were also people who were very accepting. And I thought it was really great that the documentary captured that, because too often we don't hear those stories of, you know, acceptance, especially when you look at how the Black community is depicted and how people in Africa are depicted as well. Did anybody else notice that, or what were your thoughts about that?
I mean, I definitely appreciated that, and I mean, I appreciated, and Zanele, I mean, you should definitely loop in here. The movie was very real, but for me, it was very uplifting. Right, and just like the diversity of the struggles that the women showcased had. Like one woman was like, okay, I'm trying to raise money to do artificial insemination, and that was pitted against the couple that was living underneath a bridge, right? I mean, granted, they're all Black lesbians living in South Africa, but the challenges that they're trying to overcome are very different. And I appreciated that spectrum of, like, you know, the challenges. I mean, even though all black lesbians living in South Africa, that they're very different. So I guess my question is to Zanele is, you know, how did you connect with these women that you decided to showcase, and how did you decide to edit their stories and bring them to light and create a cohesive story?
Before I respond to that, I think it's very important for me to say my work is not only on lesbians. I don't want to limit that, but that's how the work is known. Maybe 70% is on Black lesbians because I identify as a Black lesbian. But I have friends who have since transitioned that I grew up with, of which I respect their transition, and I give them support wherever possible, emotional support, etc. In the documentary, you have a trans man from Uganda that tried to challenge the Ugandan politicians and government, and he's a good friend. His name is Victor Mukasa, and he's wearing a black suit there, and I'm shooting him under the bridge. I've known him for a long time, for more than 8 years, and he came to South Africa when the situation was bad. 8 years in Uganda when they just took on the movement there. The people who are featuring in my work, most of the people who are participants in my work are friends and also acquaintances, people who are friends of friends. And how I make the decision in making sure that who comes on board and what's not dependent on who was available at that time when we were shooting. But I had whose story was important, like all aspects were important, of course, but at the time I was thinking, of like what was being mediated and published. So had to structure it in such a way that we don't tell only one story. We know that the common story in South Africa is about curative rapes and also brutal killings of Black lesbians. That's the most daunting experience that most of us we've having to support, and we witness that and support families and girlfriends and all those who are really affected by it. So for me, it was very important to tell a story of hate crime as a problem, as a big issue that we all need to focus on, to bring voices of men on board, also to create a picture of not everybody is homophobic. We do have support from our families. We do have support from other Black men on the street who denounce hate crimes or who denounce any queerphobia or transphobia that is in place. The importance of family. I mean, I come from a family. My family is embracing that, but in the voices of some members, we thought that we have, especially from this, the soccer players. I'm a big fan of Brisbane soccer teams, and I have a soccer team in my hometown. Brought, on board. And in Cleveland, we'll be hosting games, and there'll be a South African team or South African teams that will represent the country. A team that will be there, 2006, but the people here don't even have that information simply because that mainstream doesn't cover such events. So that story is told as well, briefly. It's not a complete story, which means that people need to explore the particular issue of like sport activism and activity that comes with all of that. The story of artificial insemination. We have friends who have had kids, through straight relationships or what they did. And they like to children, but they can't afford simply because we don't have the best health care system. Artificial insemination, IVF, those things are so expensive. Also, I wanted people to start thinking about like sexual and sexual reproductive rights without using any fancy terms, but like simple language, and think of ordinary people who are part and parcel of our LGBTI community. People under the bridge, just one couple. And the many homeless people in the country. Maybe in the States you have also homeless people, but shelters for LGBTI individuals here. If there is one, there's one in Cape Town that I know for sure, and they opened it maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And then you have like 9 provinces. For me, I just fantasize about these things and come up with what ifs and what ifs. What every province have an LGBTI shelter. People could go to school, get degrees, and get proper jobs in order not to have employment of LGBT individuals in our countries. And that I would have liked to tell, but due to bad time, I can tell all of them. Yeah.
Zanele, I noticed when you first began answering that question, you clarified that you do not only do portraits and capture only Black lesbians. Do you find that it's difficult to not be boxed in? And then for all of the folks on the discussion, I want to ask, how do we as queer women of color celebrate our multiple identities and identities, being women of color, being women, being queer. When you look at class on top of that, how do you embrace those multiple identities without being boxed in?
First of all, I'd like to say, I don't want to use people of color because I'll be limiting. Can I use the term black right now and be blunt like that?
Sure.
And that doesn't mean I'm not recognizing other races, really. But you know, in South Africa, you're either black or white. And I've learned about people of color when I started traveling in the US or abroad or in Europe. So here in South Africa, I'm just perceived as black. I know that maybe, I don't know how much you understand about race from here. You have white people, you have Indian people, you have colored people, you have black people. You have 4 South African people. So if I say black, please forgive me.
And that's fine.
Your question was how do we then become conscious-minded as people of color, black people? As black lesbians, we need a lot of education. Terms like, I will even go as far as in like race, ethnicity, class, etc., etc. I'll just be specific between lesbians, and we need a lot of education as black lesbians because we don't understand. I have seen some people that I trust and respect projecting their own prejudice towards trans people, which hurt me so much because I could imagine myself being in that situation where a heterosexual woman projecting her own prejudice towards me because she either doesn't understand or she's just completely rude or being disrespectful. I have people that I fully respect and they want to use their own feminist Bibles and they crucify trans people. So speaking as a person who's open-minded, I think I'm open-minded. I try to learn all the time. And we need dialogue, first of all, in order to understand and fully understand. And if we don't understand, we don't need to be rude or we don't need to be disrespectful. People refuse to take, the whole issue of pronouns, If a person says to you, I'm John, it doesn't matter whether that person was JK or Jane, whatever. But there are people that I know who still insist that I know this person when the person was this and that, which is out of context because at that particular time we need to deal with many issues at hand. And I think it starts with respect and also recognizing each person's identity or each person's expression at that time. It's a long journey that still needs to be explored or taken by many of us. I don't know the situation that's sad, but here there's so much that still needs to be done in a way that when we talk about hate crimes, a lot of trans people have experienced hate crimes in South Africa, but none of those cases were documented simply because their boxes are used. We've heard of cases of like trans women being locked up in male cells in prisons where people are just picked up for nothing, maybe minor or petty crimes, and they get to be crucified here unnecessarily. We have had cases mainly of trans men who are killed just like butch lesbians being butchered here simply because of one's sexuality or simply because of one's gender expression. But all those cases, we find that people don't want to again to embrace the fact that that person was trans when killed. Do you understand? And we say, no, just a lesbian has been killed. So education is the key. And simple terminology needs to be used. Because the minute you start talking about difference, or the minute you start talking about gender, or the minute you start talking about sexualities, complexities or complex language is used, which even confuse people more. and ordinary people or people who need information the most or who need help the most end up being excluded because of the language, because also of the terms and jargon used, just to simply explain what's going on. So how can we undo our own phobias, and also how can we conscientize ourselves? We really need to educate each other. You know, seated there in the States, in the US, maybe have some friends in Europe. These conversations that we're starting now, they're much needed. This is what we should be doing in order to understand how things are done that side, and also for you to understand how things are done from this end, etc., etc. Because it's so lonely out there. It's really, really lonely and painful out there. You know, people need, maybe the US provides therapy or free therapy maybe for trans people, or maybe there's free therapy or services for gay people, but it's different for us here, because maybe our government might treat that as luxury, whereas a person who is in danger needs it more than what the next person says it.
Does anyone else have any experiences as far as being boxed in, or maybe the type of education that needs to happen within our own community as well?
Well,
So what I forgot, for a longest time we have had what is called gay games, etc., etc., and things that are not as well. That I try to document all the spaces that are not done by mainstream anyways. We will be hosting gay games. Now, the trans people, they find their ways in order to fit in, because there's nothing like transport. Yeah? There's nothing that will give trans people a space to express themselves. Will be forced to be under the same banner of lesbian or gay, even if they don't feel that way. To know that they don't belong there. And for the longest time, people like trans voices have been excluded. Yeah? The issue of, besides transport, the issue of pageants. I don't know how the lesbians I've attended and documented here. But maybe if trans people were to form their own pageants, it will become something else, which is a way of expressing beauty. I've seen some of the young trans women and the young men, trans men enter pageants, or maybe don't even know the terms, like they know that they are trans, doesn't become and enter these pageants. I shot it like an event. A lot of these things, we find that these youngsters are trans, but then because of poor service or lack of information and also so provision for them, they would say, I'm Mr. Lesbian. A person who has his masculinity just like a trans man in another part of the world, say, okay, it's better to be Mr. Lesbian because people don't have to question much and lesbians won't reject me. Yeah, and Miss Gay something, Miss Gay Soweto. And a person say, I'm a woman. And that person's friends will laugh at her because they don't understand what is going on. There is a person that I'm talking with who is Lisa Taram. She started the first trans organization in Africa, and they've been some few who are emerging in different spaces. But people say trans or gender otherwise, people either stare at you or get confused. So that education is very, 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 very much needed.
Okay, thank you for that, Zanele. I want to make sure we have time to get some of the questions in from folks who are listening to the broadcast. So someone tweeted to us, Afifa as a PhD tweeted, how do you deal with the emotional intensity of your work? And I think that could go for all of us across the board. Does maybe Isis, do you want to take a stab at that?
Right. So for me, I find the work organizing system very empowering. We talked about earlier about the different boxes that we're facing. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of identity to carry, right? And organizing Sister Cinema allows me to be very intentional about how I define myself. Sister Cinema really did start off as like a Black lesbian film screening event, and it was through feedback and evolution that we kind of morphed to being queer and being more inclusive of, you know, all shades of the rainbow and of color, to also include the stories of Native American, Latina, and Asian women as well, because culturally very similar politically. So that's how I handle the emotional intensity by empowerment of how I define myself. And I'm very open about that. So like I am a very African American, femme, bisexual, and being proud about that in regardless of the social circle, whether I'm at work, or whether I'm with African friends, or whether I'm with, you know, within the queer community. Yes, that makes sense.
Did anyone else want to weigh in?
I mean, I guess I could comment on the thing that I find most impactful about with if somebody listening to the live broadcast, chatting because there's feedback right now.
I'm not.
Yeah, I'm hearing the echo too.
Yeah.
I'm hearing the echo too. Yeah. My broadcast starts on its own. I'm not quite sure.
Okay. I think the most intense experiences that I've had dealing with the website and dealing with filmmakers and users is definitely the comments that we get from the users that have access to the content. And oftentimes, like the most interesting comments come from people who live outside of the very open and accepting community, you know, that are often first world-ish. And you know, recently I've had an interaction with a woman from Egypt who felt as though she very much wanted to watch the content, but felt like she was afraid to put her credit card information through the site because she was worried that this information was going to be tracked back to her, and she had information for her decision to watch a film that represented her. And to hear these kind of stories is, you know, it made me realize the importance of being able to showcase and present material to different people around the world, and just how fortunate we are to, we are the lucky few, I guess, you know, that have the freedom to live the way that we want to live. So to be able to also tell stories that are more challenging are incredibly important, because, you know, if you don't get up, if you're not able to get out and travel and see the world and hear the stories of our global community, I think we have a very one-dimensional, sheltered view of what actually goes on. So, yeah.
Zanele, how about you? What is your experience with dealing with the intensity, the emotional intensity of your work?
You know, I always try to get by. Sometimes it's so painful because you feel like and you need people that you could trust to work with, and instead like from inside, but get support from people from outside the community from time to time, people that I've been friends with for a long time. It has not been easy at all, at all, at all.
Okay.
Okay. So I think, are you all still hearing that echo, or are we okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not really sure who's the source of the echo.
I think it's coming from the speakers from Andrea's computer, maybe.
Yeah, I just lowered my volume. I just got your message.
Oh, not from Andrea's. Sorry.
I was like, yeah.
It's not like giving me the names. Oh, from Deidre's computer. I meant. Sorry.
It's okay. Okay. I still hear an echo. So it could be the software. I'm not too sure.
Technology's not quite perfect yet.
Right.
So just speak slowly. Know that there'll probably be an echo.
Okay. So I think I wanted to just hear more about you all. How did this film personally resonate with you, and what parts of it resonated with you? Danielle, I know you had written about it on Autostraddle. Was there anything that personally really resonated with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the part from Zanele's work that resonates the most with me is the visual activism, and I think that was very present and very clear throughout the film, how she's trying to give a voice to people who are not usually given the opportunity to speak out. Can people hear me? Is the echo being kind of crazy?
It's a bit weird.
I can hear each of you just fine. I'm sorry I had to turn my camera off. I had to switch locations, but
No worries. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay. So for me, it was about the visual activism, the part of the film where she was actively engaging with people who usually wouldn't have access to the resources that would give them a voice, that would let other people from other parts of the world, like me, hear about their stories, hear about the challenges and obstacles that they're facing. So what resonated with me was how simple it is to be able to empower people within your community. And I really appreciated seeing that in the film, and how she accessed her connections of like her loved ones and her family and her friends to be able to speak about the experience of living as a gay LGBTQI Black person in South Africa. So that's kind of like what resonated the most, particularly coming from Latin America and understanding that I know people back home that share the same stories, but they don't have the access to be able to speak about them. So that's kind of what touched me the most about the film, and what kind of moved me to like follow.
What role do you all see as for us here in the U.S. And Zanele, you can also weigh in on this.
Mhm.
What role do we play being in the United States, and some of us being allies as far as not within the Black community or of African descent? What role do we play in sisterhood or community, and making sure that we are whether it's being resources, being support systems, being sisters in this struggle with our Black lesbian sisters who are in South Africa.
Mm.
Not an easy question.
Is that for all of us, or is that for me?
Zanele, if you wanted to weigh in.
Get the response from people.
I'm sorry. So, Zanele, are you asking, do you want us to provide feedback to the film now, or do you want written feedback later on?
Before, I just want to know if you have had feedbacks more than just like on Facebook and like that, making written comments.
Okay. So Zanele, and for everybody else on the call, Zanele messaged me and kind of wanted insight as to what were people's true feedback from the film, aside from the movie, and if we had any written feedback. Particularly, I guess this would be a particular question for you wrote the article and you would have the comments that were in Autostraddle. And Zanele wanted to include that in an article related to the film. So do you remember any comments to your article about difficult love, Danielle?
Yeah, definitely. We're addressing me right because I'm having a hard time with the echo, understanding kind of it.
That might be because somebody has two things going on. Google.
That's probably Skype and Google. Hopefully it's. I tried putting myself. So I'm gonna put myself on mute and just text. Let me know if you can hear better. Right.
It's better now.
Oh, it's better now. I haven't put myself on mute yet, so. Okay. So
Okay.
we can.
Isis,
Yes.
we continue.
Yeah. Oh, I was waiting for Daniela to answer.
Okay, cool. So we're ready. Awesome. So actually, so there weren't as many comments on the article this time around, but I do know that I had a lot of friends approach me about it and talking about how they really appreciate it because they didn't know that work like that was out there, that they didn't know that there was access to that kind of information and to that kind of point of view and perspective. So that was something that was really cool. We've talked about Zanele on Autostraddle twice before. One of our writers, Jamie, has written about her twice. And a lot of people are really engaged because they're like, this is a person that is bringing a real perspective about this issue. I think the thing that I appreciate the most is that it's not coming from an external source or an observer about how they live over there, but it's more immediate and it's more of a lived experience. It's more of Zanele's narrative, giving space to other people to join in and speak about how it exists within her world. So that's mostly the comments that we get about it, and that's mostly what the interest comes from, because there are all these people that even though they don't have that experience there, they don't live there, they still see themselves there because they're like, well, she's giving a voice to someone who would have never been able to speak out otherwise.
Right.
So that's most of the comments that we get about it.
And Zanele, not to put words in your mouth, but when Zanele was messaging me, she was really looking for, were there any criticisms, areas of improvement for the documentary? I know when we screened it in Seattle, people really appreciated the film. I didn't hear any criticisms. I think the length was really good.
Yeah.
And I think for me personally, it was like Daniela was saying, it was very important that the film was about queer women in South Africa, and it was done by a black queer woman, right? As opposed to like somebody from Europe or something else coming in and making the movie. I think that was super important for me. But were there any criticisms that y'all had or that you heard of that people had?
Honestly, I also think because of the novelty of the subject and because so few people have actual exposure to anything related to what she's talking about, there weren't any criticisms that I could think of, because everybody was just so supportive and like moved by the fact that like finally somebody's talking about this and that there are other people moving about it. So I'm sure that there is someone out there with like technical criticisms or anything, and they can definitely comment on the article and I will pass them on. But the initial response was just like pure support, because they're like, this is the first time that I see something like this, please keep doing it, kind of thing.
Deidre, can you hear us? Okay. So I'm not very sure what Deidre's status is, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's no criticism.
Can you all hear me?
The only thing that I can think of is I just want more people to see this film.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a criticism, that's just, I mean, I don't know what was, when the film came out, where it was featured and where it was filmed, but I think that it's up to us definitely to get the word out there with resources like Sister Cinema and Elixher and Autostraddle and Bus Films. It's our responsibility as well to make sure that when these great stories that are out there, that it reaches our communities.
I agree. I 100% agree with that. Because I think I heard about difficult films, even though I feel like I try to do a lot of research about queer women of color cinema, like randomly through an Indiegogo campaign. So.
Yeah, and I think we have about 4 more minutes left, Isis. I think that would be a good time if you want to tell folks more about the campaign and maybe show the video.
Yes. So I don't. So Zanele was asking me, had we heard of Audrey Law the board, the Berlin years, and I was like, yes, we screened that earlier this year at Sister Cinema. So ideally, the plan was to actually show the Sister Cinema Indiegogo campaign video. I have a fear that that's not going to work on this technology platform. So instead, I'll tell you about it.
Why don't you reenact the whole video?
all 52 takes. So Andrea and I put together a wonderfully fabulous promo video, so you should definitely watch it. But so what we're trying to do is raise money to create a queer women of color channel on busfilms.com. And what that means is that there'll be a dedicated channel for queer women of color cinema. So films like, maybe not necessarily Difficult Love, Stud Life, Mosquito Mari, just to name a few. And this conversation gets into that, like the curation of those films. Like, if you have an interest in those films, how do you find them? Right now, it's really hard. So the goal is that this queer women of color channel on busfilms.com will help people interested in that genre or people who don't know that genre to find those movies. So we've raised about over 50% of the funds that we need to raise to launch this channel. We have until January 3rd, Thursday, January 3rd, to raise the remaining funds. So please tell your friends on Elixher.com, tell your friends on Autostraddle, Twitter, and Facebook. Every donation counts, as long as it's over $5. Am I missing anything, Andrew?
Great. Well, thank you everyone for being a part of this. Zanele, thank you so much. We know it's very early where you are, so thank you for taking the time to do this.
Sure.
Isis, thank you for coordinating this. Deidre, Daniela, Andrea, thank you for joining us for this great discussion. And this link will be online for folks if you want to hear the conversation again, if you missed part of it at the beginning, and definitely look for the Indiegogo campaign for Sister Cinema, make a donation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.